Listen carefully. Nobody ever teaches you this part of strength. They tell you how to be loved, how to be chosen, how to stay, but they never tell you what happens when you finally stand up and walk away with your dignity intact. This is not a story about manipulation. This is not about games. This is about power, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, and doesn't chase. Because the truth is, a man doesn't cry missing you when you hold on tighter. He feels it when you release control, reclaim yourself, and become someone he can no longer access at will. And if you're ready to stop proving your worth and start embodying it, then stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change the way you see love, absence, and yourself forever. Power is not proven by how much you endure or how long you stay when something is draining you. Real power begins the moment you stop chasing explanations, attention, and validation, and instead turn that energy inward. When you choose yourself, something shifts. You are no longer reacting to his behavior. You are responding to your own standards. And that is where your presence starts to matter more, because it is no longer guaranteed. Most people think being unforgettable means doing more, loving harder, giving endlessly, sacrificing quietly. But what actually makes someone unforgettable is restraint. It's knowing when to step back without bitterness, without drama, without announcements. When you stop running after someone who has grown comfortable with your availability, the silence forces reflection. Not because you planned it that way, but because absence reveals what presence once provided. Choosing yourself is uncomfortable at first. Your nervous system has been trained to reach out, to fix, to smooth things over. But discipline is what separates emotional strength from emotional dependency. When you don't rush to fill the gap, when you don't explain yourself for the 10th time, you allow space for consequences. And consequences are what teach value. Not words, not promises, experience. This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about no longer abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. When you start honoring your time, your energy, and your emotional limits, you stop performing for love. You become grounded, centered, calm. And that calm is unsettling to someone who was used to having access to you whenever they wanted, because now they feel the shift, they feel the distance, and they don't know how to reach you the same way anymore. A man doesn't miss a woman because she disappears dramatically. He misses her because her absence creates contrast. Life feels different without her presence stabilizing things. Conversations feel quieter, moments feel emptier, and that emotional gap doesn't come from games, it comes from growth. From a woman who stopped negotiating her worth and started living as if it was non-negotiable. When you choose yourself, you also accept a hard truth. Not everyone will follow you into your next level. And that's okay, because the goal was never to be chased. It was to be respected. To be remembered not as someone who begged to stay, but as someone who walked away whole. That memory carries weight. It lingers longer than arguments ever could. And here's the most important part. Whether he cries missing you or not is no longer your responsibility. The moment you choose yourself, you win. Because you're no longer living for a reaction. You're living in alignment. And that kind of power doesn't fade when someone leaves. It multiplies when you finally stop chasing and start becoming. Silence is not weakness, and it is not avoidance. Silence is control. It is the moment you decide that your energy is too valuable to be wasted on repeating yourself to someone who already heard you the first time. When you stop explaining your feelings, stop defending your reactions, stop justifying why something hurt you, you are not giving up your voice. You are reclaiming it. Because a person who truly cares doesn't need endless explanations. And a person who doesn't will never understand, no matter how many words you use. Most people talk themselves into exhaustion. They argue hoping to be understood. They overgive hoping to be chosen. They over-explain hoping to be validated. But all that does is teach someone that you will always be there, no matter how they show up. Silence interrupts that pattern. It creates a pause where there used to be noise, and in that pause, something powerful happens. He is left alone with his own thoughts, his own actions, and the absence of your emotional labor. When you stop filling every gap with words, you stop cushioning the consequences of his behavior. You are no longer there to soften the discomfort, to smooth the tension, to make things easy. And that's when absence becomes loud. Not because you disappeared, but because your presence used to regulate the emotional environment. Without you explaining, fixing, or reassuring, he feels the shift. Conversations feel unfinished, situations feel unresolved, and that discomfort forces awareness. Silence also exposes truth. It reveals who only listened when you begged, and who was paying attention all along. When you stop arguing, you stop giving free access to your emotions. You don't react immediately. You don't rush to respond. You let people sit with uncertainty. And uncertainty is uncomfortable for someone who relied on your predictability. That's not manipulation. That's boundaries. That's emotional maturity. There is strength in not responding right away, in not jumping in to clarify, in allowing your actions to speak instead of your words. Silence communicates that you are no longer available for confusion, disrespect, or half-effort. It says, "I trust myself enough to step back." And that confidence is deeply unsettling to someone who thought they had emotional access to you whenever they wanted. A man doesn't feel your absence when you announce it. He feels it when he realizes you're no longer engaging the same way, when your energy is no longer trying to convince, correct, or connect, when your silence is calm, not angry, grounded, not reactive. That kind of silence forces reflection, because there is nothing left to argue with, only himself. And the moment you stop explaining, something else happens. You start hearing yourself again. You regain clarity. You stop doubting your instincts. You realize how much energy you are spending trying to be understood instead of being respected. Silence becomes a filter. It removes noise, distraction, and emotional chaos. And what's left is self-respect. That's when missing you becomes inevitable. Not because you demanded it, but because you stopped offering yourself in pieces. You chose peace over proving. And that choice echoes louder than any words ever could. Absence only hurts when what was there actually mattered. If your presence was constant but unappreciated, predictable but taken for granted, then leaving won't register as pain. It will feel like relief. That's a hard truth, but it's an important one. A man doesn't miss noise. He misses impact. He misses the woman whose presence made life smoother, deeper, more grounded. And that kind of value is never created by overgiving or self-erasure. It's created by showing up as yourself, fully, without begging to be acknowledged. When you step back, your absence must change the emotional temperature of the room. Not because you were entertaining, but because you brought stability, insight, warmth, and clarity. If you were always fixing problems, absorbing stress, or carrying emotional weight that wasn't yours, your absence will feel heavy. Because now, those responsibilities return to him. And that's when loss is felt, not in loneliness, but in realization. A vacation is something you enjoy because it removes responsibility. A loss is something you feel because it removes support. If your absence feels like freedom to someone, then your presence was never respected. And that's not something to grieve. It's something to learn from. Real value doesn't come from being easy to access. It comes from being intentional, from showing up with standards, from not pouring into people who treat your effort as automatic. When you stop showing up the same way, life doesn't just go quiet. It becomes heavier for the person who relied on you emotionally. Decisions feel harder. Conversations feel emptier. The emotional cushion you provided is gone. And that's when reflection begins. Not because you demanded recognition, but because your absence created contrast. He starts noticing what used to be done for him without thought. And now it's not being done at all. This is why you never announce your exit emotionally. You don't threaten distance. You don't explain it into existence. You simply change how you show up. You stop overfunctioning. You stop filling gaps that aren't yours. You stop making life easier for someone who hasn't made space for you. And when you do that calmly, without anger, without revenge, the impact is undeniable. Loss doesn't scream. It settles in slowly. It shows up in small moments, when he reaches for a conversation that isn't there, when silence replaces familiarity, when effort is suddenly required where comfort used to exist. That's when missing you becomes real. Not dramatic, real. Because now, your absence demands more from him than your presence ever did. And here's the most important part. Your goal is not to be missed. Your goal is to be valued. If someone only realizes your worth after you step back, that realization is theirs to carry, not yours to manage. You didn't leave to teach a lesson. You left because you understood one. That your presence is powerful and it should never be given where it is treated like something disposable. Boundaries are not walls you build to punish someone. They are lines you draw to protect yourself. They are quiet, firm decisions about what you will no longer tolerate, explain, or negotiate. When you set boundaries, you are not pushing someone away. You are revealing how close they are allowed to stand, and that clarity changes everything. Because respect is not created through availability. It is created through consistency and limits. When you are always reachable, always accommodating, always adjusting, people don't feel security. They feel entitlement. They learn that your time bends, your energy stretches, and your needs can wait. Boundaries interrupt that conditioning. They introduce structure where there was once emotional convenience, and structure forces awareness. It makes people pay attention, not because you demanded it, but because access now has conditions. Stepping back doesn't mean disappearing or becoming cold. It means you stop overextending yourself to maintain connection. You respond instead of react. You engage without abandoning yourself. You leave when something crosses a line instead of staying and hoping it changes. And that self-respect shifts the dynamic. Because a man doesn't miss a woman who revolves around him. He misses the one who has her own center. Distance only feels threatening to someone who benefited from your lack of boundaries. To someone who respects you, boundaries actually build trust. They communicate stability. They say, I know who I am, and I know what I deserve. And that confidence is grounding. It creates a sense of safety because there is no confusion, no emotional chaos, no constant negotiation for basic respect. When you step back at the right time, it forces recalibration. The dynamic can no longer run on autopilot. Effort becomes visible. Intention becomes necessary. And if someone truly values you, they adjust. Not out of fear of losing you, but out of recognition of your worth. If they don't adjust, then the boundary has already done its job. It has revealed the truth. Boundaries also free you from resentment. You stop silently keeping score. You stop giving while feeling unseen. You stop hoping someone will magically understand what you never enforced. Instead, you become clear, calm, direct in your actions, even if your words are minimal. That clarity is powerful because it doesn't argue, it stands. A man begins to miss you when he realizes he can't access you the same way anymore. Not because you became distant, but because you became intentional. Your time is no longer default. Your energy is no longer guaranteed. And that shift creates contrast. He starts noticing the effort it takes to be close to you, and effort creates value. But here's the truth that matters most. Boundaries are not about making someone miss you. They are about making sure you don't lose yourself. Missing you is a byproduct, not the goal. The goal is self-respect, peace, alignment. And when you live from that place, whether someone steps up or steps away, you remain whole. That is real power, not controlling emotions, not forcing longing, not trying to be unforgettable, but standing so firmly in your worth that your presence is felt because it is chosen, not because it is endlessly available. Emotional discipline is not about suppressing your feelings or pretending you don't care. It's about choosing how, when, and where you express them. It's the ability to feel deeply without letting those feelings control your behavior. When you have emotional discipline, you don't explode, chase, or spiral when something feels uncertain. You pause, you observe, you respond with intention instead of impulse. And that self-control carries a quiet authority that people feel immediately. Most people are emotionally reactive. They say whatever comes to mind, act in the heat of the moment, and then regret it later. Chaos feels familiar to them, but calm is rare, and rarity creates impact. When you don't react the way someone expects, when you don't argue, don't plead, don't try to force clarity, you disrupt the pattern. Your steadiness becomes noticeable. It creates contrast against emotional noise, and that contrast draws attention. Calm confidence is unsettling because it signals self-trust. It says you are not dependent on immediate reassurance to feel okay. You don't need to win an argument to feel validated. You don't need constant communication to feel secure. That kind of inner stability shifts the power dynamic without you ever trying to control it. Because now, your emotional state is no longer something someone else can easily influence. When you stay composed during moments that usually provoke anxiety, you send a clear message. You know your worth, and you are not afraid of discomfort. You allow silence without rushing to fill it. You allow space without panicking. You allow uncertainty without losing yourself. And that creates gravity. People start leaning in, not because you demanded attention, but because your presence feels grounded. Emotional chaos pushes people away, even when they care. It overwhelms, confuses, and drains. Calm, on the other hand, invites reflection. It slows things down. It gives space for thoughts to catch up with feelings. A man begins to miss you when he realizes that your emotional steadiness brought balance into his life. Without it, things feel louder, heavier, more scattered, and that absence is felt deeply. Discipline also protects your dignity. You don't say things you can't take back. You don't reveal everything in moments of vulnerability to someone who hasn't earned that access. You don't make emotional decisions that cost you self-respect later. Instead, you move with intention. And that self-respect is magnetic because it shows you are not ruled by fear of loss. This doesn't mean you become distant or cold. It means you become selective. Your emotions are real, but they are not available on demand. You express them where they are valued and handled with care. And when someone realizes they no longer have unlimited access to your emotional world, they begin to understand its value. A man doesn't miss emotional chaos. He misses emotional safety. He misses the woman whose calm presence regulated situations without force. The one who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. The one who could walk away with grace instead of burning bridges. That kind of strength stays with him long after conversations end. And again, the goal is not to be missed. The goal is to be centered. Because when you master emotional discipline, you are no longer moved by uncertainty. You move through it with clarity. And whether someone follows you or not, you remain grounded in yourself. That is what makes calm confidence unforgettable. Love was never meant to be a bargaining tool. You don't pull it back to create fear, and you don't give it away to earn approval. Real love starts with direction, not denial. When you redirect your love back to yourself, you're not becoming cold. You're becoming aligned. You stop pouring your energy into places where it leaks, and you begin investing it where it grows. That shift is subtle, but it is powerful because it changes how you show up everywhere. For a long time, your care may have been outward-facing. You checked in first. You made space first. You adjusted first. Not because you were weak, but because you were generous. But generosity without balance turns into self-neglect. Redirecting love means you start asking different questions. Not, how do I keep this connection? But, how do I feel in this connection? And once that question becomes louder, your behavior naturally changes. You start resting instead of rescuing. You start listening to your body instead of overriding it. You start choosing peace over performance. And when you do that, your energy becomes fuller, calmer, more grounded. You're no longer depleted, no longer reaching from emptiness. You are present because you want to be, not because you're afraid not to be. That difference is felt immediately. When your love is no longer chasing, it becomes steady. It stops asking for permission. It stops proving itself. And that steadiness creates contrast. A man begins to feel the shift not because you announced it, but because the emotional current has changed. You're still warm, still kind, but you're no longer centered around him. You are centered within yourself. And that recentering creates longing because it restores balance. Longing doesn't come from deprivation. It comes from awareness, from realizing that something meaningful has moved out of reach, not dramatically, not angrily, but intentionally. When you redirect love, you don't disappear. You become less available for confusion, inconsistency, and half-effort. Your time becomes deliberate. Your presence becomes intentional, and that intention makes your energy feel different, more valuable, more grounded, more real. This is where many people get it wrong. They think self-focus means detachment. But redirection is not detachment. It's refinement. You still care, but you care without self-betrayal. You still love, but you love without losing yourself. And when someone experiences that version of you, they either rise to meet it or they feel the distance grow. Either way, clarity replaces confusion. A man begins to miss you when he realizes you no longer orbit his moods, his availability, his uncertainty. Your world continues to move. Your joy is no longer paused, waiting for his response. That independence is not threatening, it's revealing. It shows him that your love was a choice, not a dependency. And choices carry weight. Most importantly, redirecting love brings you back home to yourself. You stop measuring your worth by how deeply someone else feels. You stop waiting to be chosen. You are already chosen by you. And from that place, whether someone misses you or not becomes secondary, because you are no longer pouring love into absence. You are building a life that feels full, steady, and true. And when love comes from that place, it doesn't beg to be missed. It leaves an impression simply because it was real. Consistency is what teaches someone how to treat you. Not your words, not your intentions, your patterns. When you show up the same way, no matter how you are treated, people stop noticing the effort behind it. They don't question it. They don't reflect on it. It becomes part of the background of their life, reliable, comfortable, invisible, and attachment quietly forms there, not because you demanded it, but because your presence became familiar and regulating. Human beings attach to what feels stable. Your consistency may have been the emotional anchor, the calm check-in, the steady support, the predictable care. Over time, his nervous system learned to relax around that. It didn't have to work for it. It didn't have to wonder if it would be there. And when something is always there, the mind stops protecting it. It assumes permanence. That's not cruelty. That's conditioning. Withdrawal doesn't mean punishment or games. It simply means the pattern changes. You stop offering the same access, the same availability, the same emotional labor without reciprocity. And when that happens, the body notices before the mind does. There's a disruption. Something feels off. The familiar rhythm is gone. And that absence creates awareness. Not because you wanted a reaction, but because the system has to recalibrate. This is where truth is revealed. When consistency is removed, intention shows itself. If someone values you, they lean in, they ask questions, they adjust, they feel the gap and want to understand it. If they don't, they drift. And that drifting isn't a loss, it's information. Withdrawal doesn't create disconnection. It exposes what was already there beneath the routine. Many people are afraid to change the pattern because they confuse consistency with loyalty. But loyalty to others should never come at the cost of loyalty to yourself. When you keep giving the same effort while feeling unseen, unheard, or undervalued, you teach people that nothing needs to change. Withdrawal isn't abandonment, it's alignment. It's you stepping out of a role that was costing you your peace. When the pattern shifts calmly, without anger or explanation overload, it carries weight. You're not trying to be noticed. You're simply no longer operating on autopilot. And that subtle change is powerful. Because now, effort becomes visible. Choice becomes necessary. And attachment, if it's real, starts to surface through action, not promises. A man begins to miss you, not because you vanished, but because the emotional system he relied on is no longer running the same way. The reassurance isn't automatic, the comfort isn't guaranteed, the presence isn't assumed, and in that space, reflection happens. He feels the difference between convenience and connection, between routine and meaning. And here's the grounding truth. Withdrawal is not about testing someone. It's about telling the truth with your actions. It's about saying, without words, I will no longer sustain a dynamic that doesn't sustain me. Whatever happens next is not something you need to control, because once the pattern changes, clarity follows. Consistency may have built the attachment, but your self-respect determines whether it grows or fades. And when you honor that, you don't need to force longing. You simply allow reality to surface. Over-explaining is often mistaken for clarity, but most of the time it's anxiety speaking. It's the urge to be understood at any cost, to make sure no one misreads you, leaves you, or judges you unfairly. But when you constantly explain yourself, you slowly teach people that your boundaries are flexible and your decisions are open for debate. You give away your authority without realizing it. And the more you talk, the less weight your words carry. When you stop over-explaining, you don't become confusing, you become grounded. You start trusting that the right people don't need a full presentation to respect your choices. You realize that those who care will ask with curiosity, not demand with entitlement. Silence, in this case, isn't secrecy, it's confidence. It's knowing that you don't owe everyone access to your inner world. There is something deeply unsettling and deeply attractive about a woman who doesn't rush to justify herself. When you make a decision and stand by it without excessive explanation, people feel it. They may not like it. They may question it internally, but they respect it. Because certainty doesn't shout. It settles. And when you stop filling every pause with reasons, your presence gains gravity. Over-explaining often comes from trying to manage other people's emotions. You soften your words so they don't feel uncomfortable. You explain your boundaries so they don't feel rejected. You justify your absence so they don't feel abandoned. But in doing that, you take responsibility for feelings that aren't yours to carry. When you stop doing that, you allow people to experience their own reactions. And that's where growth happens. Mystery is not manipulation. Mystery is restraint. It's choosing not to reveal everything, not because you're hiding, but because not everyone deserves full access. When you speak less, people listen more closely. When you explain less, your actions speak louder. And actions, unlike words, cannot be argued with. A man begins to miss you when he realizes he no longer has unlimited insight into your thoughts, emotions, and next move. Not because you're playing a role, but because you're no longer narrating your every feeling. You become less predictable, not in behavior, but in availability. And predictability is what dulls connection over time. When you stop over-explaining, you also stop over-investing. You don't chase understanding from someone who has already decided not to understand you. You don't repeat yourself to someone who benefits from pretending they didn't hear you. You conserve your energy. And that conservation changes your posture, your tone, your presence. There is power in letting people sit with unanswered questions. Not because you want to control the outcome, but because you trust yourself enough not to rush the process. If someone values you, they will lean in with respect. If they don't, the distance will grow naturally. Either way, you gain clarity, and that is what makes you rare. Not silence for effect, not distance for drama, but self-respect that no longer needs to be explained. When you move from that place, missing you is no longer something you try to create. It becomes a natural response to someone who finally understands that your presence was never ordinary. It was simply taken for granted. A strong woman does not exist to make life comfortable for others. She exists to live fully, to embody her own standards, and to inspire awareness through her presence. Comfort is easy, predictable, and passive. Reflection, on the other hand, is active, unsettling, and transformative. When someone is forced to look at themselves honestly, it challenges habits, assumptions, and complacency. That is not cruelty. It is impact. And impact is what creates longing, not by design, but by consequence. When you stop accommodating every mood, every expectation, and every impulse, you create space for self-awareness. A man begins to notice not only what he is missing, but also what he has taken for granted. Your presence was never meant to be a safety net. It was a mirror. When you no longer cushion mistakes or soften the blow of indifference, reflection becomes unavoidable. And discomfort is the first step toward growth, even if it's painful. Strength is often misunderstood as rigidity or hardness, but true strength carries empathy without surrender. A strong woman can love, nurture, and support, but she does so on terms that honor her own boundaries. She doesn't compromise her integrity for ease or harmony. That steadfastness triggers reflection because it forces someone to ask, do I value what I have, or have I been coasting on what was freely given? And those questions don't always have comfortable answers. Growth is inherently uncomfortable because it forces awareness of patterns that were previously ignored. People resist seeing themselves clearly because it means taking responsibility for choices, behaviors, and inattention. When you step back and stop making things easy, you are not punishing. You're showing what life looks like without constant accommodation. Your absence is not empty. It is revealing. And revelation by its very nature stirs emotion. The discomfort created by your strength is what makes you unforgettable. It isn't a performance. It isn't a manipulation. It is simply the natural effect of being grounded in yourself while someone else realizes they have not been fully present. That realization can be bitter, confusing, or painful, but it is necessary for true understanding. People rarely miss what they have not fully appreciated, and they rarely grow without feeling the void of what they have taken for granted. A strong woman also models accountability, showing that she does not tolerate negligence, disrespect, or half-hearted effort. When someone experiences that standard, they are forced to reflect on their own choices. Did they rise to meet her? Did they engage fully? Did they contribute equally to the relationship? Or did they coast while she carried more than her share? Reflection is not punishment. It is clarity. And clarity is often accompanied by longing because it shines a light on what has been lost. Ultimately, the power of a strong woman lies in her alignment. She does not create discomfort intentionally. She creates presence intentionally. Her absence, her boundaries, and her unwillingness to compromise who she is trigger reflection naturally. Missing her is not about control. It is about awareness. It is about the undeniable truth that someone who inspires growth, demands reflection, and lives unapologetically is rare. And when that realization hits, it resonates far beyond words. When you walk away whole, you carry yourself with a completeness that cannot be undone. There is a difference between leaving because of anger, fear, or disappointment, and leaving because you have honored yourself. The first leaves traces of chaos, regret, and confusion. The second leaves a mark that resonates long after the moment has passed. When you are whole, you do not crumble in absence. You do not linger in longing. You simply continue living in a way that reflects your worth. And it is that presence, even in departure, that remains unforgettable. Memory is not created by drama or spectacle. It is created by impact, the quiet influence of someone who moved through life with intentionality and self-respect. A man will not remember every argument or every compromise. He will remember the way you held yourself when he could not. He will remember your steadiness, your boundaries, your unwavering sense of self. He will remember that your love was deliberate, your attention was earned, and your presence was a gift, not an entitlement. That is what lingers. Walking away whole also teaches the value of what was present without relying on fear to make it apparent. There is no need for manipulation, for games, or for dramatics. When you live fully in yourself, when you refuse to fragment your identity for someone else's comfort, your absence becomes a teacher. It teaches reflection, growth, and awareness. People remember not because you demanded it. They remember because you stopped compromising the essence of who you are. Being remembered is an active resonance that continues to affect someone long after your departure. It is the recollection of the standards you set, the integrity you maintained, and the energy you embodied. It is felt in small, subtle ways, in a quiet moment when he recalls how you carried yourself, in the realization of what was lost, in the awareness that someone existed in his life who could not be replaced because she refused to be anything less than herself. That memory becomes an echo of your power. There is also liberation in walking away whole. When you prioritize completeness over attachment, you are no longer dependent on recognition or longing to validate your worth. You do not chase his awareness or demand his reflection. You step back with grace, knowing that being remembered is not a task. It is the natural consequence of living with authenticity and strength. Your memory lingers not because of insistence, but because of substance. The power of being remembered also lies in its permanence. Physical presence fades, voices quiet, and conversations end, but the impression of someone who embodied wholeness leaves a lasting imprint. It is a reminder that respect, self-possession, and emotional integrity are rare and valuable. When you are remembered, it is not for what you gave up, but for what you stood for. And that is a legacy that outlives moments of absence, indifference, or misunderstanding. Ultimately, walking away whole is the culmination of every choice you make in honor of yourself. It is the embodiment of all the boundaries you set, all the love you redirected, all the silence you maintained, and all the discipline you practiced. You do not leave a void because you withdrew in fear. You leave a presence because you remained complete. And that is why memory lingers, why impact resonates, and why a man or anyone who experiences you deeply cannot help but feel the weight of what he lost when he no longer has it.